Don't go under there. Her voice cracked like something breaking inside her chest. Please, they'll kill every single one of you. She stood barefoot in the middle of the rain-soaked road, arms stretched wide, 14 years old, and shaking so hard her teeth rattled, not from cold, but from something worse, from knowing exactly what was waiting in the dark beneath that bridge. And the man on the lead bike looked at her, rain running down the silver scar along his jaw, and felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. Because she wasn't afraid of the bikers, she was afraid for them. If this is your first time here, welcome. And if you've been with us before, you already know what kind of stories we tell. Hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me because this one will reach into your chest and not let go. The rain had been falling for 3 hours straight when Nash Callahan raised his fist and brought 19 motorcycles to a rolling stop. It wasn't the rain that stopped him. Nash had ridden through hurricanes, through black ice, through the kind of weather that made sane men pull off the highway and waited out in a diner with bad coffee and worse pie. 21 years on the road had made him immune to discomfort and deeply, almost supernaturally attuned to danger. What stopped him was the girl. She had appeared in the beam of his headlight like something conjured from the darkness, a thin figure in soaked clothing, arms flung wide, feet planted on the yellow center line, with a desperation that told him she wasn't moving. Not for him, not for any of them. Behind him, he heard engines throttle down one by one, the sound rolling back through the convoy like a wave retreating from shore. He could feel his brothers watching, waiting. 19 men who trusted his read of a situation the way sailors trusted weather vanes. Nash cut his engine. He swung off the bike, slowly, deliberately, the way you move when you don't want to spook something wild. She didn't run. That was the first thing that surprised him. Most people, when 19 Hell's Angels materialize out of the rain in front of them, find something urgent to do in the opposite direction. This girl, soaked to the bone, her dark hair plastered flat against her face, wearing what appeared to be a trash bag across her shoulders, as a makeshift rain cover stood her ground like she'd planted roots through the asphalt. Her eyes found his through the downpour. They were not the eyes of a frightened child. They were the eyes of someone who had already calculated the cost of every available option and decided that stopping these men was the only one worth taking. "You can't go under there," she said. Her voice was steadier than her body. "I know you don't know me. I know this looks insane, but you cannot go under that bridge." Nash stopped about 10 feet from her, close enough to talk, far enough to give her space. "Why not?" he said. She blinked, rain from her lashes. "Because there are 14 armed men waiting for you in a kill zone. They've been setting up since this afternoon. I've been watching them." The words hit the night air and just sat there. Behind Nash, he heard Decker, his sergeant-at-arms, a man built like a refrigerator and twice as cold, step off his own bike. He heard the soft creak of leather as other men shifted, but nobody spoke. The rain filled the silence between them all. Nash studied her face. She wasn't performing fear. She wasn't the kind of scared that comes from watching too many movies. This was the specific, stripped-down terror of someone who had been living inside a dangerous situation for a very long time and had just made the most important gamble of her life. 14 men, Nash repeated. Yes, armed. Assault rifles on the east side. I counted at least 2 elevated positions, one on the concrete support beam, one on the embankment. There's a truck parked on the north exit. That's their command center. The formation creates a crossfire. She paused. If you ride in at speed, the bikes make it about 40 feet before the sight lines converge. You'd have no cover and no exit. The night went very, very quiet. Even the rain seemed to soften, as if the weather itself wanted to hear better. Nash turned his head slightly toward Decker without taking his eyes off the girl. "You hearing this?" he said low. Every word Decker said, and his voice had changed. The flat skepticism was gone. Something more careful had replaced it. Nash looked back at the girl. "How do you know this?" She met his gaze without flinching. "Because I've been living under that bridge for 4 months and 11 days. The name she gave him was Ivy Mercer. She said it the way people say their names when they're not sure anyone will remember it, quietly, without expectation, like she'd gotten used to being invisible. But everything else about how she carried herself contradicted that. She stood in the rain and explained the ambush layout with the kind of methodical precision that made Nash's chest go cold, and not because she was wrong, because she was right in ways that only came from watching. The elevated position on the east beam, she said, is manned by one shooter. He's been there since 4:15. He smokes. He's been doing it under his jacket so the ember doesn't show, but the wind shifted about an hour ago and I could smell it. She looked at Decker. There's a second position on the embankment, the north slope about 60 feet up from the waterline. That one I only saw once. He moved in after dark. He's better. He doesn't smoke. Decker said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then she's describing a professional setup. I know, Nash said. Nash! That was Priest from the back, his voice carrying careful and clear. Who sets up a professional ambush under a river bridge in the middle of the night? Nobody answered that. It didn't need an answer yet. It needed the next question. Nash crouched down slightly, not to make himself smaller, but to put himself at eye level with the girl. Ivy, who are these men? Something moved across her face. Not fear, something older than fear, something that had been sitting inside her for months, waiting for someone to finally ask. They work for a man named Razor Vance, she said. He's a contractor. He runs crews that handle, she seemed to search for the word problems, things that need to disappear. Evidence. People. What kind of evidence? Nash asked. She looked at him for a long moment. My father's, she said. Her father's name was Daniel Mercer. He had been a county environmental engineer for 11 years. Not a flashy job, not a dangerous one, or so everyone thought. He drove a pickup truck with a cracked windshield that he kept meaning to fix. He made his own coffee every morning because he said the office stuff tasted like regret. He coached youth soccer on Saturdays and kept a laminated photo of Ivy in his work badge holder right behind his ID. He had discovered something 14 months ago that he was not supposed to discover. The river system beneath this county, a network of drainage channels, runoff passages, and natural waterways that eventually fed into the public water table, had been used as an illegal dumping corridor for toxic industrial waste. Not a small amount. Ayeshiwicham. Not an accident, a systematic operation that had been running for more than a decade, carefully routed through blind spots in the county, inspection records disguised in the documentation by someone who understood exactly how the system worked and exactly where the oversight gaps were. Daniel Mercer had found it because he was good at his job, because he went places the inspection reports said had already been checked and found things those reports said weren't there, because he had a habit of pulling on loose threads. He had spent 6 months building a case, quietly, methodically. He hadn't told anyone at work because he didn't know yet who to trust. He hadn't filed a report because he needed the picture to be complete before anyone could bury it again. He had told Ivy he was working on something important. He had told her it was going to matter. 3 months later, he was dead. The official cause was a single vehicle accident on a stretch of rural highway he had driven hundreds of times. No witnesses, no skid marks. The guardrail showed impact damage, consistent with a vehicle traveling at high speed. His truck went 40 feet down an embankment into a dry creek bed. The investigation lasted 9 days. The ruling was accidental. Ivy had known from the first hour that it wasn't. He left his laptop at home that morning, she told Nash. The rain was starting to ease, dropping from a downpour to a steady, relentless drizzle. He never did that. He worked from it constantly. He left it because he knew something was wrong. He knew someone was watching him. How old are you? Nash asked. 14. He nodded slowly, didn't say anything for a moment. Where's your mother? The question landed softly, but the answer came out even softer. She died when I was 6. It's been just the two of us. Nash absorbed that, didn't look away from her, didn't shift his weight or change his expression, because men who'd seen the things he'd seen learned early that flinching at someone else's pain was a luxury, not a kindness. After the accident, Ivy continued, people from the county came to the house. They said they were there to help arrange things, welfare service, legal matters. I heard them in my father's office. She paused. They weren't looking for documents to help me. They were looking for his research. Did they find it? No. And for just a moment, something that might have been pride moved through her expression, because I'd already moved it. Decker made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, more like the sound a man makes when he realizes he's underestimated something. 14, he said, Almost 15, Ivy said, and she was completely serious. She had run 4 days after her father's funeral. Not because she was impulsive, because she had thought it through and concluded that any official placement, foster care relatives, she barely knew the county system, that had people inside it she couldn't trust, put her father's evidence at risk. Whoever had killed him was still looking. They would watch where she landed. They would find their way in. So she had disappeared instead. She had taken the most important pieces of her father's documentation, the soil samples he'd stored in the garage, the USB drives he'd hidden behind the water heater, the 4 composition notebooks filled with his handwriting that she'd found tucked under the false bottom of his filing cabinet, and she had wrapped them in waterproof bags and carried them to the one place in the county she knew was hard to find, hard to access, and had no surveillance cameras within 2 miles. The underpass. She had been living there ever since. "You've been there 4 months, Nash said. It wasn't a question. He was working through the weight of it. 4 months and 11 days, she said. "I've had help, not from anyone official. The librarian in town, Mrs. Calloway, she doesn't ask questions. She lets me use the bathroom to clean up. She leaves things in the book return slot sometimes. Food, a dry pair of socks. She never says anything about it." A beat. She's good people. Nash thought about that, about a 14-year-old girl maintaining a covert existence for 4.5 months in a drainage underpass to protect her murdered father's evidence, sustained by a librarian who communicated in food and socks, in the quiet language of people who understand that sometimes doing the right thing means not saying a word about it. He had met a lot of people in his life, a lot of different kinds of brave. He had never met quite this kind before. "You said they're there tonight because of the evidence," Nash said. "They found you." Ivy's jaw tightened. "Not me. They found the water. The contamination has gotten worse. There are federal monitoring stations downstream. They're starting to flag anomalies. Vance's people needed to come in and remove whatever physical trace is left before anyone starts tracing it upstream." She looked toward the darkness beneath the bridge. "My shelter is in a maintenance alcove about 30 feet inside the north abutment. My father's evidence is behind a false panel in the back wall. If they do a full sweep of that underpass," she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "How long have they been setting up?" Nash asked. "Since 2 o'clock this afternoon. I watched from the embankment. 12 vehicles came in over 4 hours. They came in from different directions, different intervals, staggered arrival so nothing looked coordinated on any traffic camera." "Staggered arrival," Decker repeated quietly. He looked at Nash. "That's professional protocol." "What I said," Ivy told him, and her voice was steady in a way that made Decker blink. "Razor Vance runs military-grade crews. My father's notes mention him twice. He's been contracted before for work in this region." Nash stood up to his full height. He turned away from the girl for just a moment, not dismissively, but the way a man turns away when he needs to think without his face showing what he's thinking. 14 men in a professional ambush formation under a bridge. A murdered engineer's daughter guarding a federal case in a waterproof bag behind a false wall. A convoy of 19 bikers who had ridden into the wrong place at the wrong time and been warned off by the last person on earth they would have expected to do the warning. He turned back. "Ivy," he said, "you've been sitting on this evidence for over 4 months. Why haven't you gone to law enforcement?" She looked at him with those eyes that were too old for her face. "Because my father discovered this through county records. County Environmental Agency. Someone inside that system falsified inspection reports, rerouted documentation, buried complaints for over a decade. He wrote that in his notes. He didn't know who, specifically." A beat. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" "You don't know who to trust," Nash said. "I don't know which office is clean," she corrected. "There's a difference. Federal might be, state might be, local I can't risk it. I needed someone who wasn't connected to any of it." She looked at the convoy spread out behind him in the rain. "I've been watching traffic under this bridge for months. I know the difference between civilians, cops, and criminals." She paused. "I've never seen anything like you." Decker almost smiled. It was the closest thing to a compliment the club had received in a law enforcement context since about 2003. "We're not law enforcement," Nash said. "I know," Ivy said. "That's why I ran into the road." The decision Nash made in the next 60 seconds was the kind of decision that doesn't get made with calculations. It gets made with the part of a person that exists underneath all the calculation, the part that knows certain things the way the body knows cold, the part that has been shaped by 21 years of choosing which roads to ride and which ones to leave alone. He turned back to his men, 19 faces in the rain, some of them young, some of them old enough to have grandchildren who didn't know what Grandpa did on weekends, all of them watching him with a particular quality of attention that came from trusting the man in front of them to read things correctly. "Decker," he said, "yeah. Pull Priest and Hawker. I want eyes on that embankment from the east side ground approach, only no lights. 5 minutes." Decker was already moving. "Rourke," Nash said to a lean man with a gray beard near the back, "take the 2 newest prospects swing 2 miles west, find the county road that runs parallel to the river. If there's a command truck on the north exit, I want to know what it's facing." Rourke nodded once and turned without a word. Nash looked at Ivy. "Your father's evidence," he said. "How far inside the alcove?" She held his gaze. "You're going in." It wasn't a question either. "We're not riding through," Nash said. "So yes, we're going in." Something happened in Ivy Mercer's face then. Something that had been wound very tight for 4 months and 11 days shifted just slightly like a cable under enormous tension, finally finding a fraction of slack. She didn't cry. She didn't look relieved in any soft or simple way. She looked like someone who had made a bet with everything she had and was only now beginning to understand she might not lose. 30 feet in from the north entrance, she said. "Left wall. There's a maintenance panel, a gray steel 2-inch gap at the bottom. The bags are stacked behind it right side. 4 of them. Waterproofed." "Got it." She reached into her jacket, the motion of someone accustomed to carrying things carefully, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She held it out. "The diagram," she said. "I drew it this afternoon when I realized what they were setting up. Every position I could confirm." Nash took it, opened it slowly. The drawing was precise, measured, done in pencil with calm, steady lines and small notations at each marked position, estimated distances, sight angles, cover quality. In the top right corner, a compass rose. In the bottom left, a scale. He had seen tactical maps drawn by men with actual military training that looked less careful than this. He looked up at her. "Your father taught you this." "He taught me to pay attention," she said. "I figured out the rest." Nash folded the map back, tucked it inside his jacket. He looked at her for one more moment, this rain-soaked girl who had run barefoot into a road of oncoming motorcycles to warn 19 strangers about a trap she had no obligation to stop, who had kept her murdered father's evidence alive for 4 months, through sheer stubborn courage, who had drawn a tactical diagram of a professional ambush formation with a pencil and the specific gravity of someone who understood exactly what was at stake. "Stay back from the road," he said. "Stay low. You don't move until I come back to you. Understand?" She nodded. "Then they won't expect you to come at them on foot." "I know," Nash said. "And the man on the east beam," she added, "he's been up there for hours. He's going to be stiff. Left shoulder." Nash looked at her one more time. "You've been planning this," he said. Not an accusation, almost the opposite. Ivy Mercer looked back at him with the eyes of someone who had been alone in a concrete underpass for 4 months and 11 days, holding the only evidence of her father's murder, watching a professional kill team set up around her hiding place, and waiting with the specific patience of someone who had no other option for exactly the right moment. "I've been planning this for 3 weeks, she said quietly. "I just didn't know the players yet." Nash turned back toward the bridge. The rain kept falling, and 19 men moved silently into the dark. Nash had been in tight situations before. He didn't use that word tight the way civilians used it, meaning stressful or uncomfortable. He used it the way old soldiers used it, meaning the kind of situation where the margin between walking out and not walking out had narrowed down to the width of a single decision made at the exact right second. He'd been in a few of those. He respected them. He didn't go looking for them, but he also didn't back down from them when they found him. He pulled Decker close before they split off from the main group, the rain still coming down steady and cold, and he kept his voice at the level of a man talking to himself. "She drew that diagram from memory," he said. "From observation. No training, just watching." Decker looked at him. "I know what you're saying." "I'm saying that diagram is accurate. I'm saying we treat every position on that paper as confirmed until we learn otherwise. Agreed. Decker glanced back toward where Ivy had retreated to the embankment's edge, crouched low under a concrete overhang, invisible to anyone who didn't know to look. She's something else, that kid. She's going to be something else when this is over, Nash said. First, we make sure there's an over. He gave the signal and the group fractured quietly. Not the chaotic scatter of men reacting, but the deliberate dispersal of men who had ridden together long enough to communicate in half gestures and shared instinct. Priest and Hawker went east, moving wide and low along the riverbank, staying in the tree line where the muddy ground softened their footsteps. Rourke took the two prospects west toward the parallel county road. The remaining 14 split into pairs and held position near the bike's engines, everyone running silent. Nash took Decker and a man named Colt Quiet, former Army, the kind of man who never raised his voice because he never needed to. And they went north along the river's near bank, approaching the underpass from the upstream side where the water noise would cover movement, and the angle gave them a view of the north exit before the north exit had a view of them. The bridge above them was old county infrastructure concrete and rebar from the early 70s, the kind of construction that was built to last 50 years and had lasted 53 through sheer stubbornness. The underpass itself was wide. 4 lanes of overhead roadway meant the open space beneath was substantial, big enough for a kill zone, big enough for 14 men to spread out and wait. Nash pressed his back against the concrete abutment and listened. The river moved, the rain moved, and underneath both of those sounds he caught something else, the specific stillness of men trying not to make noise. It had a texture to it, that stillness. A weight. He'd felt it before in places he didn't talk about anymore, and feeling it now in a river underpass in rural America, with a girl's pencil-drawn map inside his jacket, brought everything back to a single clarifying point. These were not rent-a-guards or county thugs. These were professionals. He looked at Colt. Colt had already come to the same conclusion. He could see it in the set of the man's shoulders, that particular stillness that matched the stillness on the other side of the wall. Nash held up 4 fingers, then pointed east. Colt nodded, 4 on the east approach. The girl had written 2 elevated, 2 ground level on that side. He pressed his earpiece and clicked twice their signal for confirmed contact, no voice. Priest clicked back from the east embankment. 3 seconds later, Hawker clicked once. Confirmed elevated position, east beam. The smoker. Right where Ivy said he'd be. Nash let out a slow breath. She was right about everything. The weight of that landed on him differently now that he was standing in it. A 14-year-old girl, alone, hungry, running on willpower and grief, and the specific fury of a child who had watched the world fail her father and decided without asking anyone's permission that she wasn't going to let it fail him twice. He tapped Decker's arm. They moved. What happened in the next 40 minutes was not the kind of thing that got described in neat sequences afterward. It never was. What Nash would remember later, what he always remembered from moments like this, were not the actions themselves, but the sounds between the actions. The way Colt moved through a space without disturbing the air around him, the specific silence that fell when the East Beam shooter realized too late that the sound behind him was not the river. The sharp intake of breath, the single muffled impact. The beam was clear. Priest clicked 4 times from the embankment. East slope secondary position, the better shooter, one who didn't smoke, the one Ivy had only caught moving once. He had positioned himself with a line of sight that covered the main entry and the northern 60 feet of the underpass interior. It was a good position. It would have been a killing position if 19 bikers had ridden in at speed the way they were supposed to. Priest didn't announce how he handled it. He clicked 4 times, then clicked twice more. Clear. Nash exhaled. 2 elevated positions down, 12 men and a command truck remaining. He pulled Ivy's diagram from inside his jacket, shielded it with his body from the rain, and studied the ground position she'd marked. 6 men on the east interior spread across the support pillars. 4 on the west side in a staggered line, the rearmost 2 covering the exit. The command truck parked across the north exit road, with 2 men outside and presumably Vance inside. She had marked each position with a small notation. Not just location, she'd noted which ones had clear sight lines to the others, which positions would become isolated if the communication chain broke where the structural columns created natural blind spots. She had mapped not just where they were, but how they were connected. Nash stood there in the dark with rain dripping off his chin and thought about Daniel Mercer, a county engineer who kept a photo of his daughter in his work badge holder, who had raised this girl alone from the age of 6, who had apparently spent 14 years teaching her to pay attention. Pay attention to what? To everything, apparently. He put the map back, looked at Decker. "West line first," he said. "We peel them from the rear." Decker nodded. "Rourke." Nash clicked his earpiece 3 times. Rourke's voice came back barely above a breath. "Command trucks facing south. 2 outside, engine running." A beat. "There's a generator cable running from the truck to a panel inside the east wall. They've got the interior rigged with portable lighting." Remote switch. Nash processed that fast. A lighting rig inside the underpass meant Vance was watching the interior from his truck, a camera feed almost certainly. Which meant the moment any of his interior men went down, if Vance was watching that feed, he'd know. "Can you get to the cable?" Nash said. "Already on it," Rourke said. "Wait for my signal. Don't cut it until I tell you." Copy. He needed the interior dark at the right moment, not too early, not too late. Cut the lights too soon and Vance would bolt in the truck before they had position on the exit road. Cut them too late and the interior men would have warning before Nash's people were in place. This was the part that required timing so precise it became almost intuitive. Nash had been doing this long enough to trust his gut over his watch. He looked at Colt. "You take the west rear too. I want them quiet." Colt was already gone. Nash moved along the western wall of the underpass interior, staying low, staying tight to the concrete. He could hear the east side men now. Not words, just the occasional shuffle, the tick of equipment, one man breathing harder than the others. Nervous. Even professionals got nervous when a job ran longer than planned. 14 armed men had been crouched in position for hours waiting for a convoy that never arrived. That was its own kind of pressure. Nash reached the second to last west position. The man there had his attention oriented north toward the expected entry point, which meant his blind spot was directly behind him against the wall Nash had just come along. Nash had closed to within 6 feet when the man's radio clicked. A voice came through quiet, controlled with the flat cadence of someone accustomed to giving field reports. "Status check. All positions, respond." The man in front of Nash raised his radio. Nash moved. It was over in 3 seconds. No sound worth noting. The man's radio dropped against the concrete with a soft clatter, and Nash caught it before the second bounce, pressing it against his chest to muffle anything further. The radio crackled. "West 2, respond." Silence from West 2, a beat. "West 2, by whom?" Another beat. And then in that controlled field report voice, 2 words that told Nash everything about the man on the other end of that radio: "Check perimeter." That was the tell. A panicked commander says what happened, what went wrong. Where is everyone? A professional commander who suspects a counteraction says check perimeter because he's already calculating that his perimeter may have been compromised, and he wants eyes before he commits to anything. Razor Vance, Nash thought, was very good at his job, which meant the next 90 seconds were going to be the ones that mattered. He pressed his earpiece once one clicked the signal for accelerate, and then he was moving. What happened next happened fast enough that it stopped being a sequence of events and became a single continuous moment. Colt took the rear 2 west side men in the span of about 8 seconds. Nash heard the sounds and didn't look back. Priest and Hawker came through the east embankment entry simultaneously, which pulled the east interior attention toward the wrong side. The 4 east pillar men raised their weapons toward the entry where the motorcycle headlights should have appeared and found nothing there, which was when the remaining members of Nash's 14 came in from the upstream river, approached quiet fast, and from a direction that wasn't on anyone's tactical map, because it wasn't on Razor Vance's map. It was on Ivy Mercer's. She had noted in the bottom margin of her diagram in handwriting, so small Nash had almost missed it, upstream. Bank shallow water crossing 40 feet north of abutment, clear approach, no sightline from interior. She'd marked it with a small star. A 14-year-old girl had found the one approach angle that 14 professional mercenaries hadn't covered. Nash would think about that later. Right now, there was shouting from the interior, not panic, but the controlled aggression of trained men responding to a threat they hadn't anticipated, calling positions, covering each other's movement, doing everything right except for the fact that they were responding to a situation that was already 4 moves ahead of them. "Lights," Nash said into his earpiece. Rourke cut the cable. The interior dropped to full dark. And in the darkness, with the river sound and the rain, and the specific disorientation of trained men whose visual reference had just been yanked away from them, Nash's people moved through the space they had already memorized. It was over in less than 3 minutes. Not cleanly, not without bottoms. Hawker took a hit to his left arm that he wouldn't mention until afterward because Hawker was the kind of man who filed injuries the same way he filed complaints, which was never. 2 of the East Side men got clear of the interior and made it about 60 yards along the riverbank before Priest caught up with them. One man threw his weapon down the moment he realized his entire team had collapsed around him. He sat down on the concrete, put his hands on top of his head, and said with genuine exhaustion, "I want a lawyer." "Great instinct," Decker told him. The command truck on the north exit was the final piece, and it was the piece Nash had been most careful about because Vance was in there, and Vance had already figured out something had gone wrong, which meant Vance was deciding right now between 2 options: run or negotiate. Nash walked up to the truck alone. He could feel Rourke and the 2 prospects flanking wide, blocking the exit road, but he walked straight to the driver's door and he knocked on it. Twice. Deliberately, like a man knocking on a neighbor's door. Nothing for 5 seconds. Then Vance's voice came through the door, muffled but clear. "You're not law enforcement." "No," Nash said. "Who sent you?" "Nobody sent me," Nash said. "I was just trying to get my people home dry. You complicated that." A pause. "How many of mine are down of all of them?" "Nobody's dead. That was a choice I made. I need you to understand that was a choice." Another pause, longer this time. Nash could hear the specific quality of a man recalculating, not panicking, not despairing, just running new numbers against a situation that had gone completely sideways. "The girl," Vance said finally, "what about her?" "She warned you." "She did." The silence stretched. Then, "She's been there 4 months. I've had people looking for that evidence for 3 of them." Something moved in Vance's voice, not admiration exactly, but the professional's version of it, the acknowledgement that came from one competent person recognizing another. "She's 14. "Almost 15, Nash said, a long pause. The door opened. Razor Vance was a lean man in his late 40s with close-cropped gray hair and the specific economy of movement that came from a life spent in situations where unnecessary motion got people killed. He stepped down from the truck with his hands visible and his expression carrying the flat resignation of a man who had done the arithmetic and arrived at the only remaining answer. He looked at Nash. "The man who ordered this," he said, and his voice had changed to the field command. Tone was gone, replaced by something more careful, more deliberate. The voice of a man choosing his next words the way a surgeon chooses instruments. "His name is Bartholomew Creed. He runs Creed Chemical, 17 facilities across 4 states. He paused. "He's been dumping into this river system for 11 years. Nash held his gaze. Daniel Mercer figured that out. Mercer was thorough, Vance said, and then after a beat that felt like it cost him something, too thorough to leave in place. The words fell between them and sat there. Too thorough to leave in place. A county engineer with a cracked windshield and a photo of his daughter in his badge holder, too thorough to leave in place, which was how men like Bartholomew Creed talked about murdering fathers. Nash felt something move through him that wasn't quite anger. It was colder than anger, more deliberate. Creed ordered the hit, he said. Creed ordered the problem resolved, Vance said with the careful precision of a man who already knew he was going to cooperate and was already shaping how he'd tell it. I resolved it. And then the problem turned out to have a 14-year-old variable that nobody had accounted for. He almost said it with something like wonder. She kept the evidence alive, Nash said. She kept the whole case alive, Vance said. Everything Mercer built, the soil data, the contamination logs, the financial trail, the correspondence, it's all under that bridge. And she guarded it for 4 months like... He stopped, looked away for a moment, looked back. I've run operations against hardened targets, military installations, corporate security with 7-figure budgets. He paused. I have never had a target hold position under the kind of pressure she was under for that long. Nash said nothing. Vance looked at him directly. I'll cooperate. Full testimony. The entire Creed operation contracts payments, every job I ran for him going back 6 years. Locations of contamination sites he wanted buried. Names of officials on his payroll. He said it straightforwardly without drama, the way a man files a report. I want a deal on record before I talk to anyone official, but I'll cooperate. Nash studied him for a moment. Why? Vance was quiet for 3 seconds. Because she's 14 years old, he said. And she did what she did for her and Creed is going to try to bury it again the moment he hears tonight went sideways, and the only way to stop him from succeeding is to make sure this goes federal fast and loud. He held Nash's gaze. I'm not a good man, but I know where the line is. Nash looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket for his phone. Don't move from this truck, he said, and don't make me regret this conversation. He walked back toward the underpass, toward the upstream bank, toward the embankment overhang where a girl in a trash bag poncho was crouched in the dark, holding everything together with the specific determination of someone who had decided 4 months ago that she was not going to let her father disappear. He found her exactly where he'd left her. She looked up when she heard his boots. Her eyes asked the question before her voice did. It's clear, Nash said. Ivy Mercer closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Just 2. Then she opened them and stood up and said, My father's evidence, is it? Still there, Nash said. Nobody got to it. She breathed. One full breath in and out, the specific breath of someone whose body had been running on emergency reserves for a very long time and had just been told it could stand down for 30 seconds. Vance is in the truck, Nash said. He's talking. Her eyes sharpened. What did he say? Enough, Nash said. He named the man who ordered your father's death. Ivy stood very still. Bartholomew Creed, Nash said. She didn't react with shock. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse or shout or do any of the things that people expected from a 14-year-old girl receiving the name of the man responsible for her father's murder. She nodded slowly once, the way her father must have nodded when a piece of data finally confirmed what the rest of the data had been pointing to all along. My father wrote that name in his last notebook, she said quietly. He wasn't sure. He had circumstantial evidence, but not direct connection. She looked up at Nash. He wrote it in the margin, a question mark next to it. Nash said nothing. He knew, she said. He just didn't have the proof yet. Nash looked at this girl, this 14-year-old girl who had been surviving alone in a drainage underpass for 4 months, who had drawn a professional tactical diagram in pencil, who had run barefoot into a road of oncoming motorcycles to warn 19 strangers, who had just heard the name of her father's killer and responded by telling him what her father had written in a margin. He thought about what Vance had said, a 14-year-old variable that nobody had accounted for. Come on, he said, let's get your father's evidence. She fell in beside him without another word, and they walked together toward the underpass, the rain finally beginning to ease for the first time all night, and the darkness ahead of them held the thing that Daniel Mercer had died trying to protect, and his daughter had spent 4 months and 11 days keeping alive, and 19 men had just fought their way through to reach. The question mark in the margin was about to become an answer. The maintenance alcove was exactly where she said it would be. 30 feet in from the north abutment left wall, a gray steel panel with a 2-inch gap at the bottom. Nash had sent Colt ahead with a flashlight, and Colt had found it in under a minute, which told Nash everything he needed to know about how precisely Ivy had described it. She hadn't approximated, she hadn't estimated, she had given him measurements, she had taken herself probably with her hands, probably more than once the way someone measures something when they know the measurement is going to matter. Ivy went to the panel herself. She didn't wait for Colt to open it, didn't ask permission, didn't hesitate. She crouched down, hooked her fingers into the gap at the bottom and pulled. The panel swung out on a hinge that had been oiled recently. Nash noticed that the specific silence of a hinge that had been maintained, and she reached into the space behind it with the practiced ease of someone who had reached in there hundreds of times. 4 bags came out, olive-colored military surplus dry bags, the kind designed to keep gear waterproof in river crossings. Each one sealed with a roll-top closure that Ivy checked with her fingertips before she handed it to Nash, confirming the seal the way a diver checks equipment before a dive. Automatic. Thorough. This one first, she said, handing him the largest. That's his soil sample documentation. GPS tag collection logs, chain of custody records, lab analysis from 3 independent facilities he contacted anonymously. He was worried about a single point of failure. Nash took the bag. It was heavier than it looked. This one is the financial trail, she continued, handing off the second bag. Invoices, shell company structures, bank routing records. He found the money moving between Creed Chemicals' subsidiary accounts and a county contracting firm that didn't actually do any contracting. She paused. The firm's registered agent is a man named Garfield Pruitt. He was the deputy director of the county environmental office until 8 months ago. He resigned suddenly. My father noted the timing. Decker, standing at Nash's shoulder, made a low sound. She's been sitting on a RICO case. And then some, Nash said quietly. Ivy handed him the third bag without commentary. He could feel through the seal that it contained hard drives multiple given the weight distribution. The fourth bag she held for a moment before passing it over. It was smaller than the others, softer. He could tell without opening it that it contained paper. Those are his notebooks, she said. Her voice didn't change when she said it, but something in the air around her changed, a subtle shift in pressure, the way a room changes when someone says a name they don't say often. 4 of them. He wrote everything longhand because he was worried about digital access. He had a system abbreviations reference codes because he was also worried about someone reading them if the wrong person found them first. A beat. I know the key. I memorized it. Nash looked at her. You can read them, he said. I helped him develop the system, she said simply. We used to do crosswords together. He liked codes. Nash held the bag for a moment before handing it to Colt. He thought about a man sitting at a kitchen table with his daughter doing crosswords, working out an abbreviation system that he probably told himself was just a private joke between them. Just a game, not something he would actually need, not something she would actually have to use alone in a concrete underpass 14 months later to decode the case that got him killed. He thought about the specific cruelty of that. Ivy, he said, I need to make a call, a federal contact. Someone I trust, and I need you to understand what I mean when I say that. I don't give that word out cheap. She looked at him steadily. Who? Her name is Diana Reyes. She's a special agent with the EPA's Criminal Investigation Division. She's been working environmental crime cases for 11 years, and she's never once been connected to a local or state political network because she specifically requested assignment outside any region where she had prior relationships. She's the kind of federal agent who exists because a very specific kind of person decided they wanted to spend their career doing the thing that actually matters instead of the thing that gets you promoted. Ivy was quiet for 3 seconds. How do you know her? Nash almost smiled. She investigated our club 4 years ago, looked into allegations that we were running chemicals through our transport network. He paused. She was thorough. She was fair. At the end of it, she told me, directly, you're clean on this, but I want you to know I would have gone wherever the evidence led. I said so would I. We've had a professional understanding since then. Ivy considered that. She investigated you. Thoroughly. And you trust her. Because she's thorough, Nash said. Same reason I trust you. Something shifted in Ivy's face at that brief, almost invisible, the expression of someone who had been operating in a state of complete self-reliance for so long that an external affirmation landed with unexpected weight. She absorbed it without showing too much of what it did to her. Call her, Ivy said. Nash stepped back toward the north entry and made the call. Diana Reyes picked up on the second ring, which told him she was either awake at this hour for her own reasons or she had a sense for calls that mattered. He gave her the situation in under 90 seconds, no preamble, no softening, just the architecture of it, dead engineer, 4 months of preserved evidence. 14 mercenaries neutralized a cooperating contractor, ready to name a principal Creed Chemical, 11 years of illegal dumping, county-level corruption, the whole structure. Reyes was silent for 8 seconds after he finished. Then where are you? He gave her the coordinates. I need 3 hours, she said. Vance will run if you're not here in 2, Nash said. He's cooperating now because he's still in the emotional window of the decision. 2 hours is the outside edge of that window. Another pause. Shorter this time. 2 hours. Keep him talking. Can you do that? I'll have Decker talk to him, Nash said. Decker can keep anyone talking. It's his one superpower. Who's Decker? My sergeant at arms. Of course, Reyes said, and the dry note in her voice told him she had filed that information in exactly the right context. Tell him not to ask anything that could constitute interrogation. Just keep the man comfortable and present. Understood. Nash, her voice shifted slightly, not softer but more direct. The girl, is she all right? He looked at Ivy, who was standing with the 4 dry bags arranged at her feet, taking a quiet inventory she'd already done 100 times, her hands moving over the seals, with the automatic care of someone making sure that the most important things in her world were still intact. "She's operational," he said. Reyes was quiet for a moment. "That's not what I asked." "I know," he said. She's holding. She's been holding for 4 months. 2 more hours won't break her." "All right," Reyes said. "I'm moving." He ended the call and walked back to where Decker was waiting. He relayed Reyes's instructions, and Decker nodded once and went back toward the command truck without a word, because Decker was the kind of man who understood that some tasks were assigned rather than explained. Nash turned to find Ivy watching him. "She's coming," he said. "I heard," Ivy said. She had sharp ears. He was going to stop being surprised by that. 2 hours. 2 hours. She nodded. Then she did something he didn't expect. She picked up the smallest of the dry bags, the one with the notebooks, and held it against her chest with both arms. Not dramatically, not the way someone performs grief, the way someone holds something they're not ready to put down yet. "He almost made it," she said quietly. "He had all of this. He just needed a little more time." Nash said nothing. "He wasn't going to report it locally," she said. "He had already decided. He was going to go directly to the federal level. He had a contact at the EPA, someone he'd met at a conference 2 years earlier. He wrote her name in the first notebook." A pause. "Diana Reyes." The name dropped into the air between them and just stayed there. Nash stared at her. Ivy looked up at him. He met her at an environmental compliance conference in Richmond. They talked for 40 minutes about illegal dumping patterns in rural drainage systems. He wrote afterward that she was the most prepared person in the room. He underlined it. Nash felt something move through him that was not quite shock and not quite something else. It was the specific sensation of a story that had been running in parallel finally merging into one lane. Daniel Mercer had spent 6 months building a case, and at the end of it had chosen Diana Reyes as the person he was going to take it to. His daughter had spent 4 months protecting that case, and the man she'd let make the call had independently arrived at Diana Reyes as the person he trusted to handle it. "Your father had good instincts," Nash said. "Yes," Ivy said. "He did." She set the bag down carefully with the others. Nash looked at her for a moment. "How long have you known about Reyes, that her name was in the notebook?" "Since the 3rd week," Ivy said. "I decoded that part of the first notebook early. I've known for almost 4 months that she was the right person." A beat. "I didn't have a phone. I didn't have a way to reach her that couldn't be traced. And I didn't have any way to guarantee that reaching out directly wouldn't flag the wrong people first." She paused. "I was waiting for the right moment." Nash thought about that. The right moment being 19 bikers showing up in the rain. "The right moment being anyone I could trust to make the call on my behalf," she said. "You were the first." A pause. "You were also the first people who came close enough to warn. How many people came through before us?" She was quiet for 2 seconds. 41 vehicles over 4 months. 7 on foot. Nobody stopped. Nobody looked. She said it without self-pity, the way she said most things as data, as the result of observation. "I stopped trying to flag people down after the first month. I learned to wait." Nash looked at this girl who had learned to wait, 14 years old, alone in a drainage underpass, sitting on a federal case, in a dead man's notebooks, watching 41 vehicles go by, and deciding with the specific patience of someone who understood that desperation was its own kind of danger to wait for something better. He was going to think about that for a long time. "Ivy," he said, "after Reyes gets here, after this is transferred, what happens to you?" She didn't answer immediately. He could see her running through the question, the way she ran through everything methodically without flinching, looking at all sides of it. "I don't know," she said finally. And for the first time, those 3 words sounded like what they were: not a calculation, not a tactical assessment, but the honest answer of a 14-year-old girl who had been so consumed with one enormous task for so long that she had never let herself look past the end of it. "That's okay," Nash said. "We'll figure that part out." She looked at him. You didn't think I was going to walk away after 2 hours, did you?" She didn't answer that, but something in her expression changed. Not a smile, not quite, but the precursor to the structural shift in the face that happens before the expression arrives. Then Colt appeared from the far side of the underpass, and his expression erased everything else in the space. "Nash," he said, "we've got a problem." Nash turned. What kind? The kind with a phone. Colt held up a cell phone in a sealed evidence bag. Found it on the East Beam shooter. It was recording. The silence that followed had weight. Recording, Nash repeated. Video. Started automatically, motion triggered. Colt's jaw was tight. It was pointed at the underpass interior. It's been running since they set up this afternoon. A beat. It captured everything. The setup, the positions, and about 40 minutes ago when your men came through, it captured that too. Nash felt the implications land in sequence, one after another, each one heavier than the last. A motion-triggered recording, running for hours, automatically. It was transmitting, he said. No, Colt said. Local storage only, but he paused. The phone has a scheduled upload, a cloud backup, automated. It was set to trigger at 3 a.m. Nash looked at his watch. It was 2:17, 43 minutes. If that footage uploads, Nash said, thinking out loud, Creed's people will have visual confirmation that tonight went wrong. They'll know Vance is in custody. They'll know the evidence is still here. And they'll know we called in federal agents. He looked at Colt. They'll move on Creed before Reyes can build to an arrest. They'll have him on a plane in under 2 hours. Colt nodded. He had already run the same math. Nash turned to Ivy. The phone needs to be wiped before 3 a.m. Is there anything on it? Any data that's part of your father's case? Any communication? Any record? She was already thinking. Vance's crew communicated on encrypted channels. Separate hardware. That phone is surveillance only. She looked at it through the bag. Wipe it. It's potential evidence, Nash said. Reyes will want it. Then get Reyes on the phone and tell her right now, Ivy said, and her voice had the snap of someone who had just run the calculation faster than everyone else in the room. She has 43 minutes to either authorize the wipe or find another solution. But you need to call her in the next 60 seconds because every second you spend talking to me is a second she doesn't have. Nash was already dialing. Reyes picked up in one ring this time. He gave her the situation in 30 seconds. She was quiet for exactly 4 seconds he counted, and then she said, Don't touch the phone. Don't wipe it. I'm sending a technical agent ahead. He can be there in 70 minutes. He'll block the upload remotely before the 3 a.m. window. A beat. Tell me you have someone who can keep that phone in a Faraday bag. Nash looked at Colt. Do we have a Faraday bag? Colt reached into his jacket and produced one. Nash looked at it. Of course you do, he said. I've been carrying it for 2 years, Colt said. Nobody ever asked. Nash got back on with Reyes. We have a Faraday bag. Of course you do, Reyes said with the exact same inflection Nash had just used. Phone goes in the bag right now. Nobody opens it until my tech agent arrives. Can you hold the scene for 70 minutes? We can hold it indefinitely, Nash said. Then hold it. A pause. Nash. Yeah. Is the evidence physically secure? He looked at Ivy, who was standing with her arms at her sides, watching him with the focused attention of someone who had been running this operation alone for 4 months and was still even now tracking every moving piece. More secure than it's ever been, he said. He ended the call and looked at Colt. Bag. Colt sealed the phone in the Faraday bag and handed it to Nash, who handed it to Ivy. She looked at it for a moment, this small piece of hardware that had nearly unraveled everything in the space of 43 minutes, and she took it with both hands and held it with the same careful deliberateness she held everything that mattered. Your father's contact is on her way, Nash said. Ivy looked up from the bag. She remembered him, Nash added. When I described the case, described the engineer, Reyes said before I even gave her his name, she said, was his name Mercer? She remembered meeting him. She said he was the most prepared person in the room. Ivy Mercer stood in the dark of her father's underpass holding a Faraday bag with both hands, and this time the expression that moved across her face was not the precursor to a smile. It was something older and quieter than that. It was the expression of a daughter finding out that her father had been exactly who she always knew he was. He underlined it, she said softly. When he wrote about her, he underlined it. Nash nodded. She took one breath. Then she straightened up, squared her shoulders, and looked at him with those eyes that had no business being 14 years old. Tell me what we need to do in the next 70 minutes, she said. And Nash told her. The 70 minutes moved the way time moves when every second carries consequence, not slowly, not quickly, but with a density that made each minute feel like something you had to push through rather than simply pass. Nash organized it the way he organized everything that mattered, by assigning each moving piece to the person best suited to hold it. Colt stayed with the Faraday bag, which meant the bay was as secure as anything in that underpass. Priest coordinated the detained mercenaries, 9 of them conscious and compliant, 3 requiring medical attention that Hawker, despite his own arm wound, was managing with the first aid kit that every serious rider carried as standard equipment. Rourke kept watch on the north exit road, which remained the one vulnerability Nash hadn't fully sealed. The 2 prospects were stationed at either end of the underpass approach, far enough out to give 30 seconds of warning if anything moved on the road. Decker stayed with Vance. This was the assignment Nash had thought about most carefully. Vance was cooperative, but cooperative was a state, not a guarantee. It could shift, it could cool, it needed tending, the way a fire needed tending, not smothered, not stoked, just maintained at the temperature where it remained useful. Decker understood this instinctively because Decker had spent 30 years reading people in situations where misreading them had immediate and physical consequences, and he had gotten very good at keeping the right conversations alive. Nash could hear them from across the underpass, not the words, just the rhythm. Decker's voice low and unhurried, Vance responding in shorter bursts. Good. That was the rhythm of a man who was still talking, still present, still on the right side of his decision. Nash settled near Ivy and the 4 dry bags. She was sitting on the concrete with the bags arranged in front of her, and she had taken the smallest one, the notebooks, and opened it, and she was doing something he hadn't expected. She was reading, not frantically, not searching, reading the way someone reads something they've read before, slowly with attention, as if the act of reading it again had its own purpose beyond the information. Nash sat down nearby without asking. He'd learned in the last few hours that Ivy didn't need space managed for her, she needed proximity that didn't demand anything from her. He sat close enough to be present and quiet enough to let her be wherever she was. After a few minutes, she said without looking up, "He writes about me in here." Nash said nothing. Not a lot, but in the margins sometimes, when he'd been working for a long time and needed to stop. She turned a page. "He wrote that he was doing this for the river, but also for me. Because I was going to grow up in this county. I was going to drink this water. He wrote," she stopped for a moment, then continued, "He wrote that he wanted me to inherit a world where someone had tried." The underpass was quiet except for the river and the distant murmur of Decker's voice. "He was a good man," Nash said. "Yes," Ivy said. She said it without defense, without sentiment, as a simple statement of established fact, the way she talked about everything that was real to her. Then he also made mistakes. He trusted the wrong people early on. He was too cautious with the timeline. He wanted everything perfect before he moved, and that perfectionism cost him time he didn't have. She paused. "I've thought about that a lot. The line between being thorough and waiting too long." "He got the evidence complete," Nash said. "He did." She closed the notebook. "He just didn't get it out in time." A pause. "That's what I've been trying to fix." Nash looked at her. In the middle of everything, he wanted to ask her one more thing. "The people who came to your house after the accident, the ones looking through his office, did they find anything?" "His work laptop," she said. "But he'd wiped it before the accident. He knew someone was watching. Everything important was already on the USB drives. He left the laptop clean so they'd think they'd gotten what they came for." She paused. "He was smarter than they gave him credit for." "Most honest men are," Nash said. She looked at him, then a quick, direct look, the kind that contained a question being evaluated before it was spoken. Then she asked it, "Wow, how does someone like you end up being the one to do the right thing tonight?" It was a fair question asked without judgment. Nash considered it honestly. "I think the right thing has a way of finding the people who won't turn away from it," he said. "Doesn't matter much who they are on paper." Before she could respond, Colt's voice cut across the underpass, tight and controlled. "Nash, movement on the east road." Nash was on his feet before the sentence finished. He moved to the east entry fast, where Colt was already positioned, and looked where Colt was pointing up the embankment, where the road ran parallel to the river about 200 yards out. A vehicle had stopped. Lights off, engine running, not approaching, not retreating, sitting, watching. "When did it appear?" Nash said. 60 seconds ago. Came from the north, killed its lights before it stopped." Nash stared at it. Reyes advance agent. Too early, Colt said, and too cautious. Reyes's people would approach direct. This is sitting and looking. Nash felt a shift in the situation, the specific sensation of a situation that had stabilized beginning to tip again. He pressed his earpiece. Rourke. North exit, anything moving. Clean, Rourke said immediately. Nothing since we locked it down. Priest, East Embankment. I see it, Priest said. Single vehicle. I make it a black SUV, recent model, no plates visible from my position. No plates. That wasn't a coincidence. That was intention. Nash looked at Colt. Someone tipped Creed faster than we thought. Colt's jaw tightened. Vance. Vance has been with Decker the whole time, Nash said. Not Vance. He thought fast. The detained men. Their personal phones tell me they were stripped. Colt's expression changed. We stripped weapons and radios. He stopped. I didn't tell everyone to strip personal phones. Nash turned immediately. Priest, I need you on the detained men right now. Personal phones, all of them right now. He heard Priest moving. 10 seconds. 20. Then Priest's voice came back with a flatness that was worse than alarm. 3 phones, all clear. 4th man, East Interior. The one who surrendered first, his phone was locked, but the screen shows an outgoing text at 2:41. 2:41. 20 minutes ago. While Nash had been on the phone with Reyes, while everything had seemed briefly contained, the man had sent a text. Nash walked to the detained men, found the one Priest was standing over a heavy-set man in his late 30s, sitting against the wall with his hands zip-tied in front, and his face, when Nash crouched in front of him, was doing something interesting. It wasn't scared. It was calculating. He was still working angles. Who did you text? Nash said. The man said nothing. Nash looked at him for 3 seconds. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply looked at the man with a specific quality of attention that comes from someone who has already decided to solve the problem and is currently choosing between methods. You can tell me now, he said quietly, or Special Agent Diana Reyes can ask you in about 40 minutes. Either way, it gets answered. The difference is where you sit when she arrives. The man looked up at him. Then I texted a location confirmation, he said. Standard protocol. If the operation goes dark past a certain time window, a backup team is alerted. Backup team, Nash said. 3 men. They're a standoff unit. They don't engage. They observe and report. He paused. They would have been triggered anyway at 3 a.m. if we went dark. I just moved the timeline. Nash stood, looked at Colt. The SUV on the East Road. Standoff unit. Observe and report, Colt said. Which means right now someone is on the phone with Creed telling him exactly what they're seeing. Which meant Creed already knew. Nash walked back to where Ivy was standing. She'd heard the commotion and was on her feet, bags at her sides, reading the situation with those sharp eyes. He told her in 15 seconds what had happened. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, What does Creed do when he knows? He runs, Nash said. He has resources. International. He moves fast. How fast can Reyes get an arrest warrant? She'd need to already have the evidence in hand, Nash said, which she doesn't yet, which means if he runs before she gets here, Ivy said, he might get far enough that extradition becomes the question instead of arrest. She looked at the bags, then at Nash. What if she already had it? Nash looked at her. What if I could give her enough right now over the phone to go for an emergency warrant? Ivy said. Not all of it. The keystone piece. The one thing in my father's documentation that ties Creed directly personally without any intermediary layer. She reached for the second dry bag, the financial records. My father found a series of wire transfers, 27 of them over 6 years, originating from a personal account held in Creed's name through a Cayman subsidiary. Not a corporate account, personal. Going to the county contracting firm's registered agent account. The amounts correspond exactly to inspection periods. Every time a federal monitoring cycle came through this region, a payment went out. Every single time. She had been looking for this document for approximately 15 seconds. She found it. This page, she said, holding it up. She had it memorized, Nash realized. She could go straight to it because she had read these documents hundreds of times in the last 4 months. She knew where every piece was. 27 payments, dates, amounts, account numbers. His signature is on the account authorization on page 3. She held his gaze. If Reyes has this one page, can she move? Nash called Reyes. He didn't explain. He handed the phone to Ivy, and Ivy Mercer stood in her father's underpass barefoot on concrete, holding a single page of financial documentation, and told Special Agent Diana Reyes in precise sequential order, without a single hesitation or filler word, exactly what the page contained, what it demonstrated, and where it fit in the larger architecture of her father's case. She spoke for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. When she finished, there was silence on the line. Then Reyes said, "How old are you?" 14, Ivy said. "Almost 15. Another silence. Shorter. "I met your father," Reyes said. Her voice had changed, not unprofessional, not undone, but different in some quality that had nothing to do with procedure. He was the most prepared person in the room. Ivy closed her eyes for 2 seconds. "I know," she said. "He told me." "He was building this for you," Reyes said quietly. "Not just the case, all of it. He wanted you to have a world where someone had tried," Ivy finished. Her voice held. "Yes." A pause. "I'm going to go get Bartholomew Creed, and I'm going to do it before he reaches any airport in this hemisphere. I need you to hold that page intact and have it ready for my evidence team." "It's been intact for 14 months, Ivy said. Reyes made a sound that was not quite professional and not quite a laugh. "I'll see you in 35 minutes, she said. The call ended. Ivy handed Nash's phone. She looked at the page in her other hand for a moment, this one page that her father had spent 6 months tracking down, that had cost him his life, that she had carried for 4 months in a waterproof bag behind a false panel in a concrete wall. "She's going after him," Ivy said. "She's going after him," Nash confirmed. Then Decker appeared from the direction of the command truck, and his expression had the particular compression of a man carrying new information that changes the shape of everything around it. "Nash, Vance has been talking." He glanced at Ivy, then back at Nash. "There's something he didn't say before. Something about Daniel Mercer." Nash waited. "Mercer wasn't the first," Decker said. "There was another county employee 5 years ago, an inspector named Howell. He started asking questions about the same drainage system. His case went cold, officially listed as an unsolved disappearance." He paused. "Vance says he wasn't contracted for that one. Different crew, but he knows who was." A beat. "He knows where Howell is." The weight of that settled on everyone in the space differently. On Nash, it landed as the expansion of a crime he had already understood to be serious into something categorically worse. On Decker, it landed as confirmation of what he had already suspected when Vance started talking, that men like Creed didn't become what Creed was through a single decision. They became it incrementally, each crime building the foundation for the next. On Ivy, it landed differently from both of those. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "My father knew about Howell." Decker looked at her. "What?" "It's in the 3rd notebook," she said. "He found reference to a previous inspection flag on the same drainage corridor. He couldn't find the inspector who filed it. He wrote—" She paused, and Nash could see her retrieving the exact words from memory. "He wrote, filed by T. Howell, June 2019. Inspector no longer with county, no forwarding contact. Status unknown, follow-up essential." She looked at Decker. He underlined unknown. He underlined it twice. The silence that followed was the specific silence of people understanding that a man who had disappeared into that word unknown might now, because of everything that had happened in this underpass tonight, get to come out of it. "Give Reyes Vance's statement on Howell," Nash said. "All of it, when she gets here." Decker nodded. Ivy set the financial records page carefully back into the dry bag and sealed it with the precision she brought to everything. Then she stood and looked at the 4 bags for a moment. 14 months of her father's work, 4 months of her own endurance, the specific stubborn weight of a promise, kept through circumstances that would have broken most adults. "Can I ask you something?" she said to Nash. "Anything." "The men you brought tonight," she said, "they did this. They went in there, they neutralized a professional team, they secured the scene, they held everything together for the last 2 hours. She paused. "They didn't know me. They didn't owe my father anything. They didn't have any reason to do any of this." Nash looked at her. "No." "Then why?" she asked. And it was a real question, not rhetorical, not grateful, just genuinely searching. The question of someone who had been operating in isolation long enough that the existence of unrequired help had become slightly difficult to process. Nash thought about it honestly. Because you ran into the road, he said. Because you put yourself between us and something that would have hurt us. You didn't know us either. You had no reason to help us. You would have been killed, she said. And you could have let that happen and stayed safe in your alcove, Nash said. You chose differently. So did we. She looked at him for a long moment. My father used to say that the way a person responds to a situation they didn't choose tells you everything about who they actually are, she said. Smart man, Nash said. The smartest I ever knew, she said. And then quietly, with the particular weight of something that had been true for a long time and was only now being said out loud. Until tonight. Nash didn't respond to that. Some things didn't need a response. They needed to be received and held carefully, the way you hold something that matters, the way a girl holds her father's notebooks against her chest in the dark. From outside, Rourke's voice came through the earpiece. Nash, headlights on the north approach, multiple vehicles, moving fast and direct. Nash checked his watch. 32 minutes. Reyes had made it in 32 minutes. That's our people, he said, and he looked at Ivy Mercer, who had picked up all 4 dry bags herself and was holding them 1 in each hand and 2 under her arms, ready to carry her father's case the last distance it needed to travel. Let's go, she said, and they walked toward the light together. Diana Reyes moved the way Nash had expected her to move, fast, direct, and with the specific economy of someone who had already made every decision that mattered before she arrived and was now simply executing. 3 vehicles, 8 agents, no sirens, no theater. They came in the way professionals came in when they wanted to control a scene rather than announce themselves to it. She stepped out of the lead vehicle, and Nash was struck not for the first time by the particular quality of competence that certain people carried in their posture before they said a single word. Reyes was in her mid-40s, lean with dark hair pulled back and eyes that moved across the underpass scene in about 4 seconds and came away with everything essential already cataloged. She found Nash. She walked toward him. Then she saw Ivy. She stopped. Not a full stop. She didn't break stride entirely, but something in her movement changed. A slight deceleration, the physical response to something landing harder than expected. She had been told about Ivy. She had spoken to Ivy on the phone. But there was a difference between being told about a 14-year-old girl who had guarded a federal case alone in a drainage underpass for 4 months and actually standing in front of her. Ivy was standing with the 4 dry bags at her feet, barefoot. Her clothes still damp from the rain that had finally stopped holding herself, with the straight-back stillness of someone who had decided sometime in the last 4 months that she was not going to let the circumstances around her determine how she occupied space. Reyes crossed to her directly. She didn't crouch down to her eye level, in the way adults sometimes condescended to teenagers. She stood in front of her at full height and looked at her straight. Ivy Mercer, she said. Yes, Ivy said. I spoke to your father once, Reyes said, for 40 minutes at a conference in Richmond 3 years ago. She paused. I thought about that conversation many times afterward. He was the kind of person who makes you think harder about your own work. Ivy held her gaze. He thought the same about you. Reyes nodded once slowly. Then she looked at the bags at Ivy's feet. Are these all of it? Ivy said. Soil documentation, financial records, digital storage, and his notebooks. I can walk you through the organization system. He used a reference code for the notebooks. I have the key memorized. Reyes looked at her for a moment. You memorized it? He taught me the system, Ivy said. We used to do crosswords. Something moved in Reyes's expression. Not sentiment exactly, but the recognition of something that mattered. She reached out and put her hand briefly on Ivy's shoulder. Not a pat, a deliberate adult-to-adult acknowledgement. We're going to go through all of it together, she said. You and me, tonight. I know, Ivy said. And for the first time in hours, the set of her shoulders changed. Not collapsed, nothing about Ivy Mercer collapsed. But a fraction of the load redistributed the way it does when you've been carrying something alone for a very long time and someone finally reaches out and takes hold of the other end. The next 40 minutes moved fast. Reyes's evidence team worked the 4 bags with the careful efficiency of people who understood what they were handling, not just legally, but in human terms, the weight of what a dead man had built, and a living girl had kept. Each item was logged, photographed in situ, and transferred with a chain of custody record that Reyes personally initialized. Ivy walked beside the lead evidence agent and narrated without being asked, "This bag in this order. This notation means this. This abbreviation refers to this location. This sample was collected here on this date." The agent kept looking up at her with an expression that he kept professionally neutral, but couldn't quite keep entirely flat. Nash watched from the edge of the activity. Decker appeared at his shoulder. "Vance is in federal custody. He asked me to tell you." Decker paused, which was unusual enough that Nash turned to look at him. Decker had the expression of a man who had heard something that adjusted his view of another man. "He asked me to tell you that he was glad you came in on foot instead of riding through. He said, and I'm quoting here, if they had ridden in, I would have given the order. I want the girl to know I would have given it." Nash was quiet for a moment. "Why does he want her to know that?" "Because he wants her to understand how close it was," Decker said. "And because I think he's trying in his own broken way to tell her that what she did running into that road wasn't just brave. It was the one thing that changed the whole equation." Nash thought about that, about a mercenary in federal custody, finding the specific language to tell a 14-year-old girl that she had been in every meaningful sense the decisive factor in her own story. That it hadn't been the bikers or the federal agents or the evidence or the timing. It had been a girl without shoes running into a road with her arms spread wide. "Tell him she already knows," Nash said. Then Reyes was beside him, and her voice had the quiet urgency of someone delivering news that was still warm. "Creed," she said. Nash turned. "We got him," T said. "Airport, private terminal 40 minutes outside the city. He had a flight plan filed for the Caymans. We had federal agents on the ground there based on the warrant I pushed through on the financial documentation Ivy described." She paused. "He was in the jet when they boarded it." Nash let that settle. "He was already on the plane. Wheels up in 6 minutes according to the flight crew," Reyes said. 6 minutes. She looked at him steadily. "If Ivy hadn't read me that page tonight, if she hadn't known exactly what it contained and exactly why it mattered," she stopped. 6 minutes. Nash said nothing. "We also have confirmation on Howell," Reyes continued. "Thomas Howell, the inspector who disappeared 5 years ago. Based on Vance's statement, we've directed a team to a property in the next county." Her jaw tightened slightly. "He's alive, Nash. They'll have him out tonight." Nash turned and looked at Ivy, who was 20 feet away, with her back to him, still walking the evidence team through her father's documentation with the focused attention of someone who had been preparing for this specific task for 4 months. Thomas Howell was alive. A man who had been swallowed by the word unknown for 5 years was coming back out of it because of Daniel Mercer's notes, because Mercer had underlined that word twice and refused to let it be the end of a sentence, because his daughter had memorized every page of every notebook and carried it all forward when he couldn't. Nash walked to Ivy. She heard him coming and turned. She could read his face. He had noticed this about her, that she read faces the way she read everything, with precise, unsentimental attention. "What happened?" she said. "Creed is in custody," he said. She absorbed that, brief, specific, contained. "Good. And Thomas Howell," Nash said, "the inspector from your father's notes. Vance gave up a location. He's alive. They're getting him out tonight." Ivy Mercer stopped moving entirely. She stood with her hands at her sides and her eyes on Nash's face, and for the first time since he had met her, since she had appeared in his headlights, barefoot and soaking, and certain the absolute composure she had maintained through everything cracked. Not dramatically, not in the way of someone breaking down, in the way of someone who had been holding an enormous structure in place through sheer force of will, and the structure was now being held by other hands, and her hands had nothing left they had to do. Her chin trembled once, just once. "My father looked for him," she said. Her voice was steady but different, thinner, closer to something underneath it. "He wrote that he was worried, that Howell had found the same corridor and then just stopped existing. He wrote that he was afraid of what that meant." A pause. He knew. He knew what had happened, and he kept going anyway. "He kept going for you," Nash said. "He kept going for all of it," she corrected quietly. "For me, yes, but also for Howell, for the river, for everyone downstream who didn't know what was in the water." She paused. "He was like that. He didn't do small versions of things." "I know," Nash said. I've been reading him through you all night. She looked up at him. You're exactly like him, Nash said, in the way that matters. She didn't respond to that immediately. She let it sit the way she let things sit when they were true, and she was deciding what to do with their truth. Then Reyes called her name from across the space, and Ivy turned and went, because there was still work to do, and Ivy Mercer did not leave work unfinished. The hours that followed were federal hours, procedural, documented, thorough in the specific way that builds cases that hold. Reyes's team processed the scene until just before dawn. The detained mercenaries were transported in sequence. Vance was moved to a federal holding facility with his cooperation agreement already drafted. The Faraday-bagged phone was recovered by Reyes' technical agent, who blocked the cloud upload with 11 minutes to spare, and then spent 30 seconds staring at the phone before saying very quietly that the footage on it was going to be among the more significant pieces of corroborating evidence he had handled in a career full of them. Nash stayed. He hadn't planned to, but the idea of leaving before this was fully settled was not something his body would agree to. His men stayed with him, most of them sitting on or near their bikes, nobody talking much. Everyone understanding without being told that this was not a moment to rush away from. Around 4 in the morning, Rourke brought coffee from somewhere. Nash did not ask how, because Rourke had a talent for producing necessary things from apparently nothing, which was one of the reasons he had been in the club for 17 years. The coffee was bad. Nobody complained. Decker sat beside Nash and they were quiet together for a while, which was the mode of friendship that worked best between them. Presence without demand. You know what's going to happen next, Decker said eventually. Not a question. Federal case, Nash said. Grand jury. Creed's lawyers will fight the warrant on procedural grounds, fail try again. Vance's testimony becomes the spine. The financial records become the flesh. The soil documentation becomes the environmental piece which gets its own parallel track. He paused. It'll take 2 years minimum before a courtroom. She'll have to testify, Decker said. She knows that, Nash said. She's probably already planning what she'll say. Decker almost smiled. Yeah, she is. A pause. What happens to her between now and then? That was the question Nash had been turning over for the last hour. Reyes said the federal witness program has provisions for minor children, he said. But that's an option, not a requirement. And Ivy, he stopped. Ivy has opinions, Decker said. Ivy has very specific opinions, Nash agreed. He had, in fact, already had a brief conversation with Reyes about this brief because Reyes was running 6 simultaneous operational threads, but direct because both of them understood the urgency. There's a woman in town, Nash said, a librarian, Mrs. Calloway. She's been leaving food in a book return slot for a 14-year-old girl for 4 months. Decker turned to look at him. She knew, Nash said, not everything, but enough. She made a choice every single day for 4 months to keep a child alive quietly without calling anyone without asking for credit. He paused. Reyes is sending someone to speak with her this morning. You think she'll take Ivy in? I think, Nash said, that a woman who communicates care through a book return slot has already, in every way that matters, taken Ivy in. The paperwork is just catching up. They were quiet for a moment. Then Nash said, Ivy asked me earlier what happens to the bridge. Decker looked at him. What did you tell her? I told her we'd clean it, turn it into something living. Decker considered that. You think the county would go for a memorial park on contaminated land? The contamination is evidence now, Nash said. It'll be remediated as part of the federal environmental order. When that's done, the land is clean. And Daniel Mercer is the man who generated the case that cleaned it. He paused. A park named after him on the land he died to expose. Yeah, I think the county goes for that. Decker was quiet for a beat. You've been planning this. I've been thinking, Nash said. There's a difference. Not with you, Decker said. Around 5 in the morning, Reyes found Nash near the north exit and pulled him aside. Her energy had shifted, still operational, but with something underneath it that was quieter, personal. The evidence is secure, she said. Full chain of custody. We have what we need for the grand jury and substantially more. She paused. Creed is going to prison. I don't say that easily, but the documentation Daniel Mercer assembled is among the most complete I've seen from any source, official or unofficial, in 11 years of doing this. Tell Ivy that, Nash said. I already did, Reyes said. She said she stopped. A brief, specific pause that contained something she was deciding whether to share. Then she shared it. She said he would have wanted it to be enough. Tell me it was enough. Reyes met Nash's gaze. I told her it was more than enough. I told her it was the whole case. Nash nodded. She cried, Reyes said simply, for about 90 seconds. Then she stopped and asked me about the chain of custody protocol for the USB drives. She paused. I've processed a lot of witnesses. I've never processed one quite like her. Nobody has, Nash said. The sun came up the way it comes up after a night like that, without drama, without announcement. Just the specific gray lightning of a sky that had held a lot of rain and was finally done with it. The river caught the early light and moved it downstream, the way rivers do, indifferent to what had happened on their banks, carrying everything in one direction. Nash went to find Ivy. She was sitting near the north abutment, with her knees drawn up and her back against the concrete, watching the light come. The 4 dry bags were with Reyes' evidence team now. Her hands were empty for the first time in 4 months. He noticed that she seemed slightly uncertain about what to do with them, kept her fingers loosely folded, then flat on her knees, then loosely folded again. The hands of someone who had been holding something for so long that their absence had created its own unfamiliar weight. He sat down beside her. They watched the river for a minute. Mrs. Calloway, Nash said, Reyes is going to speak to her this morning. Ivy turned to look at him. You told Reyes about her. I did. You need a place. She's already chosen you. The official part is just a formality. Ivy looked back at the river. She'll want to know I'm safe, she said. She never asked me anything. She just kept leaving things, socks, food, once a paperback book about environmental science. A pause. She knew. She always knew. Good people know, Nash said. They just know. Ivy was quiet for a moment. Then, what happens to you after today? We ride, Nash said. That's what we do. And tonight, when this is just a thing that happened, Nash looked at the river. Tonight we ride home, he said. And in a few weeks, when the federal filing becomes public and Daniel Mercer's name is in the papers the way it should have been from the start, we'll ride back through here. Pay our respects. Ivy nodded slowly. He would have liked that, she said. He respected people who kept their word. Then we're in good company, Nash said. She turned and looked at him directly, the way she had been looking at him all night, without artifice, without the social softening that most people applied to direct eye contact. Thank you, she said, all of you. You didn't have to stay. You didn't have to do any of it past the first 5 minutes. No, Nash agreed, but you did. We did. She held his gaze. Why do people do that, go further than they have to? Nash thought about it honestly. About 21 years of roads and choices and the specific accumulation of a life lived according to a code that he had never written down, but had never once doubted. Because some things are worth more than the cost of doing them, he said, and the people who understand that recognize each other, across all kinds of lines. Ivy absorbed that. My father understood that. Yes, Nash said. He did, and so do you. She looked at the river for a long moment. The light was fully up now, the early morning opening out around them. And in it, Ivy Mercer looked her age in a way she hadn't all night. 14 slight barefoot on a riverbank, her father's story finally in the hands that could do something with it. And she also looked like something else. Something that had been forged in those 4 months of cold and solitude and stubborn, relentless love. Something that didn't have a word Iboko, but that Nash recognized the way you recognize, a quality that takes a lifetime to build in most people, and in certain people arrives early, shaped by loss and sharpened by necessity. Nash, she said, yeah. The bridge, she said, when you clean it, when the park gets built. She paused. Will you put something in the design about the river? About what clean water means? So people who walk through it understand what the land was used for and why it matters. I'll make sure of it, he said. She nodded. Good. A pause. He cared about the river not just as evidence. As a river, as a thing that belongs to people, she paused. He used to take me fishing there when I was little. He said the river didn't know anything about county lines or corporate permits or inspection schedules. He said the river just went where it had always gone and carried what it was given and asked nothing in return except to be left clean. Nash said nothing. Put that on the plaque, she said quietly. Whatever else you put that. He looked at this girl, this daughter, this 14-year-old keeper of evidence and memory and her father's faith in the world, and he said, I will. The federal vehicles began their departure sequence. Reyes came to tell Ivy it was time that they were going to a field office first, then to a placement conversation with Mrs. Calloway, then through whatever came next, one step at a time, each one on solid ground. Ivy stood brushed the concrete dust from her jeans with the same automatic care she brought to everything and turned toward the waiting cars. She stopped and looked back at the 19 motorcycles lined up in the pale morning light, their riders standing or leaning or sitting in the particular formation of men who had come a long way together and were in no hurry to pretend the night hadn't happened. She raised one hand, not a wave, a salute. 19 men raised hands back. Then she turned and walked forward. Reyes filed the emergency warrants that morning. The grand jury convened 6 weeks later. Bartholomew Creed was indicted on 43 counts, including environmental crimes, bribery, conspiracy, and 2 counts of murder for hire, the latter for Daniel Mercer and for Thomas Howell, who had not been killed, but whose imprisonment on that property for 5 years constituted its own category of crime that federal prosecutors named with precision and pursued without mercy. Creed Chemical was seized within a week of indictment. Its 17 facilities across 4 states were suspended pending environmental audits that would eventually confirm contamination at 11 sites. The remediation costs were billed to Creed's frozen assets. Garfield Pruitt, the former deputy director, was indicted separately on 12 counts of fraud and official corruption. 8 other county officials followed. Thomas Howell went home to a wife who had never stopped looking for him, and a daughter who had been 9 years old when he disappeared and was 14 when he came back. He testified before the grand jury in a voice that shook only once and recovered immediately. He asked before leaving the courthouse if he could read Daniel Mercer's notebooks. Reyes arranged it. He spent 3 hours with them. When he came out, he said only, "He finished what I started. Tell his daughter." They told her. The park was approved 18 months after the night of the underpass. Nash had made calls. The right people had heard the right things. The county, newly constituted with officials who understood that the old way of doing businesses was now federal evidence, moved the approval through in 30 days. The contaminated land was remediated over a summer, cleaned with the kind of thoroughness that Daniel Mercer would have appreciated, documented to a standard he would have recognized. They called it Daniel Mercer Memorial Park. The plaque at the entrance was bronze river smooth, and it read, "Because Nash had made sure of it because a girl had asked, and he had given his word, he cared about the river." Not as evidence, as a river, as a thing that belongs to people. He asked nothing of it except to be left clean. He gave everything to make sure it was. Ivy came back for the dedication. She was 15 by then, living with Mrs. Calloway, in the way that people live with someone who had already decided to keep them, not as a guest, not as a ward, but as the person who had been meant to be there all along. She was enrolled in school. She had a room with a window that looked at trees. She slept with the light off, which she had not been able to do for 4 months, and she slept without being woken by river sounds and footsteps and the specific terror of someone who needed to stay alert, to stay alive. She slept and she let herself. Nash was there for the dedication. So were Decker and Priest and Colt and Rourke and Hawker and all the rest of them, 19 riders lined up in the parking area, cleaned up enough for a ceremony without having become anything other than what they were. Reyes stood near the plaque. Thomas Howell stood with his wife and his daughter, who was now nearly the same age Ivy had been the night of the underpass, and who looked at Ivy across the gathered crowd with the specific wordless recognition of girls who understood what their fathers were worth. Ivy stood at the plaque and read it once all the way through with her lips pressed together and her eyes clear. Then she turned to Nash. "You kept your word," she said. "Always do," he said. She looked at the park, the cleaned land, the river beyond it, the morning light moving on water that was cleaner than it had been in 11 years, measurably, documentably in ways her father had spent 6 months proving needed to be true and had died before he got to see them become true. "He would have stood here and been quiet for a long time," she said. "He was like that. When something was right, he didn't say much. He just stood in it." Nash stood beside her and said nothing. Because some things are worth more than the cost of doing them. And the people who understand that know when to speak and when to simply stand in what they've helped build, letting it be what it is, real and clean and permanent and alive. Ivy Mercer stood in her father's park on her father's cleaned land beside the river. Her father had loved and protected and died trying to leave better than he found it. and she stood in it the way he would have. And the river moved the way it always had, carrying everything in one direction, carrying it forward toward open water, toward whatever came next, clean all the way down.